we are grateful that two very strong friends and contributors, Professor Francesco Vossilla and Professor Alessandro Andreini, have filled in. And I'm really deeply grateful to you, Don Alessandro and Francesco, that we have the chance to have you. You are also extremely busy, but so it's really great to have you. Now, I will now give over to our chair of today, is Dean Jenny Lau. She's Dean of the Faculty of Business and Law of the University of St. Joseph. And we are really also very grateful for the strong support we receive from USJ, but particularly also from Dean Jenny Lau. So over to you, Jenny. Yeah, thank you so much for chairing this session and for very strong support. Thank you. Our collaboration with Professor Vossilla and Don Alessandro Andreini since many years focused on a variety of issues, also concerning Macau as an intercultural genius, the story of European missionaries on the Silk Road.
We have two speakers, Don Alessandro Andreini, who is a member of the community of San Leolino and who has a degree in philosophy and a PhD on ethical thought of the German Lutheran pastor Dietrich Bonhoeffer. I hope I pronounced correctly. And he studied theology in the Faculty of Theology of Central Italy and has been teaching religious studies in Florence. He is author of various studies on spirituality and theology, dealing specifically with the perspective of the Second Vatican Council and the new challenges of the Catholic Church in our changing world. So welcome, Don Alessandro Andreini.
Welcome, all of you.
And then we also have with us Professor Francesco Vossilla. And Dr. Vossilla is an art historian and museum studies scholar from Italy, from Florence, Italy. So he has been a member of the board and president of the Jesuit, the Link Shining, dedicated to intercultural studies after the great Jesuit artist in China. He's a member of the board of the Jesuit Macau, Macarici Institute as well. He mostly teaches classes on art history, museum studies, philosophy of art, Renaissance architecture and design for the Gonzaga University in Florence. And he is also honorary professor to the president of Fujian Catholic University in Taipei, a distant professor of history of Western philosophy of art and the practice of creative industries from Taipei, Xinjiang University, College of Management Graduate Institute of Creative Studies. He's currently adjunct professor to Xi'an Jiangtou University and has been consultant for cultural enhancement of Florence, Italy. So Dr. Vossilla has published mostly on Renaissance philosophy of art, Renaissance sculpture, and the history of Italian museums. He has focused his most recent book and articles on Michelangelo, as well on Giuseppe Castiglione, for their important contributions to the birth of modern global aesthetics. So now we will give our time to Professor Francesco Vossilla and Don Alessandro Andreini.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, we share our PowerPoint so that you can follow us with our reflection. Excuse me. This is our starting point today, because 2 days ago October 11, we celebrated, and Pope Francis had a Mass in St. Peter, the 60 years anniversary of the beginning of the Second Vatican Council. That has been, according to our point of view, really a changing point of the history of the Catholic Church, of the life and of the work, of the mission of the Catholic Church in the world. And in general, we believe that Pope Francis, so points of view, Pope Francis advices to the Church are nothing else than the execution of what the Second Vatican Council painted out in the 60s. That day, October 11, Pope John XXIII, who has been the author, so really the creator of the Second Vatican Council, gave a very impactful speech, Gaudet Mater Ecclesia. The church, the mother church, enjoys of this meeting of bishops, of this gathering. And that night, there was a big group of persons with lamps in St. Peter Place Square, and they convinced John XXIII to open the window and say some other words that are really relevant, because in this very short speech that has been remembered as the speech to the moon, because he mentioned the moon that was over the square, St. Peter Square, that night. He said something that is at the core of his idea, of his project, and also at the core of our project. And this is the statement here. Let us always look for what unites and disregard what might separate or divide us. So that looks like a very simple statement, but it is really a method of work that tries to look for really what unites and try to foster what unites, and not considering and not taking care, not pointing out continuously what might separate or divide us. So an approach that is an open approach, looking for what is good, looking for what is common, looking for what Pope Francis has translated in the title, in the project of his last encyclical letter, Fratelli Tutti, all brothers. So this is the idea. So let us always look for what unites. And I have found a page of John 23. There are a lot of discussions nowadays about the Second Vatican Council, his teachings to the Church, how we judge that teachings. Mostly in the United States, there are very, very hard discussions, and we frankly are on the side of the positiveness of this Second Vatican Council. And this method of looking to what unites could be also the ground of our project about relationships with China, with the Far East, looking to what unites. And somehow we can also think and point out that also our missionaries of the 17th century, 18th century have somehow walked in the same path that has been pointed out in these days. And this could be a method that could be, applied to a lot of sets, a lot of issues, the mission, culture, theology, and a lot art, of course. This is a photo of one of the sessions, of the official sessions of the Second Vatican Council, the biggest gathering of persons ever had in the world up to this day. So almost 3,000 persons gathering and discussing and listening. It was a very hard process. And this is just a painting about the end of the Second Vatican Council, December 8, 1965. So we are going to celebrate in a few years also the 60 years anniversary of the end. And that day, the new Pope, Paul VI, gave very touching messages to various categories of the people in the world, stressing exactly this, the fact that the Church, the new core, the new task of the Church is that one of serving human bodies, human beings. And this is exactly the translation, the new understanding of the quote of John 23. And this is also our starting point today for our presentation. I also would like to start quickly remembering, just quickly, because it will be very important for us one day to dedicate a section on the memory of Father John O'Malley, who, and I know that I'm touching something that you at the Matteo Ricci Institute understand very well, because Father John helped Don Alessandro and myself and other people at the starting point of a project which was then sort of embedded in Gonzaga University, the Castiglione project for missionary creativity, that started analyzing Castiglione, but was aiming at a discussion open to some of the Far Eastern countries, were there being some also political tensions that could be eased by looking at history, and an history which is not the history of Westerners going to Asia, but also an history of Asians accepting the presence of some Westerners. Or this was the original methodology. And I remember John O'Malley telling me how we were touching upon some nerves that were some very tense. And this was in 2014. So after that, we sort of move out of, or move forward into creating an international independent organization, the Società di Studi Giuseppe Castiglione, which has members from Europe, the United States, Taiwan, China, and so forth. So we are a small number of about 25. The greatest we were. Now, because of the pandemic, unfortunately, our rank is slim too much. So in our view, the Giuseppe Castiglione, it is something, it is an example of a way to enter another culture, to enter an otherness, which is an otherness of connection, not an otherness of singularities. So the individual, the coadjutor brother Giuseppe Castiglione, entered China for the service of 3 emperors. And the discussion has always been if in his works of art we could see elements of the missionary attitude of the day, and especially something Christian in Eden, in the Chinese symbology. I myself, or for myself, I try to understand that is not the point. It's pointless for me to try to find, for example, Marian symbology in the flowers of Castiglione. I'm going to mention those if there are, but the point was that Castiglione was painting these paintings in service of men, the emperors, who on their part were not interested in a conversion. However, they were interested in a conversation. So the point, I think, and I try to squeeze out, of course, I'm manipulating history, but the point is maybe for today, the methodology that Don Andreini was evoking is that of a conversation and conversion. If Jesus would help, it might come later. This later also help us to create a self-betterment if we place ourselves in the shoes of the missionaries. And by saying this, we don't want to offend anybody. We don't need to teach you anything about the mission. You are the missionaries. You are on the forefront. We are simply using history to share with you an interpretation, unsound as it is, modest as it might be, but for our experience, especially mine, because I'm married to a Taiwanese, it's been proved functioning. Allora, I am here presenting you some lines by Italo Calvino, one of the most important Italian writers of the 20th century. And these are some lines in a book. It's called Invisible Cities, which evokes a conversation between Marco Polo and Kublai Khan. So the UN emperor is asking Marco Polo to describe cities and to describe journeys to other cities and other cultures with his own Latin eyes. So Calvino has Marco Polo saying, arriving at each new city, the traveler finds again a past of ease that he did not know he had. The foreigners of what you no longer are or no longer possess lies in wait for you in foreign, unpossessed places. So I think that myself, or speaking for myself, I always feel this sentiment whenever I am in a city of another culture, and especially I experimented this sensation of being a traveler into a place, but also into myself. It was an itinerarium mentis that had the fortune to find a real three-dimensional scenario in front of my eyes. So what it was foreigner for me, for example, visiting Macau first time in 2008, and we were just my wife and myself, and I didn't know Stefan Rocklin or Jarek or any of the clergy there. So this was before we met in 2016. I felt that what was foreign there was also a part of me. And especially because I recognized a lineage that was familiar, that therefore could be foreign, but at the same time familiar, something that had to do with me. So when I selfishly speaking, when I am in China, I always try to maybe I fool myself, but I always try to enter into the same come si dice, vision, which is that of finding pieces of an history, of a past, of a lineage that is to be shared
with those who are hosting me. So because this discussion has to do with the pandemic and a dialogue with China after the pandemic, I thought of some images, and with Don Alessandro, we thought that, for example, Michelangelo wouldn't hurt. This is a depiction of the night in San Lorenzo. So I personally feel that during the pandemic, we enter into a night, and the night here, the statue has a face, grotesque as it is, evoking nightmares. And the pandemic is being a nightmare for, of course, tragic lives that ended tragically, or but also for anybody doing cultural mediations, because we saw bridges broken, walls raised, and now we have a war, or we talk about war, and constantly in different parts of the world, including the Chinese Strait. But the statue, recumbent as it is of night, has also an eagle, which is the owl, and the owl is an eagle, is a bird of the night, and maybe we can fly out of this night into something else. And so this is another image of Michelangelo. Maybe in this flight out of the nightmare, what the pandemic has taught us again is the fact that we are mortals, and we have a body that dies, that decays. So even, I want to try to be evangelical, even the greatest powers decay and die, and maybe there is a change. So if we understand that we are limited, this limitation might help us to grow stronger, or at least grow in a pensive state. And therefore, you know, I thought to contrast another apparently recumbent image, which I like very much, of the Shanghai Museum. This Bodhisattva, to me, is something comparable to the figures that we just have seen by Michelangelo. Of course, this is a manipulation, so to speak, of history. I'm simply presenting images for making us fly out of skins. And here, what is that I'm learning? I'm learning once again that myself could grow stronger in awareness of points that were mistakes, and to exit the circle of mistakes, I need to reflect upon my past and the past in general. But also here, I'll leave the ball, so to speak, to Alessandro for this image, for a quick thought about this.
I'd like to mention the going back to the method and what Francesco said, that first of all, that we are deeply connected, all of us, and this is something that we must really stress a lot. And probably the pandemic and the war, they gave us a sort of advice to remind this. And again, I believe that the Pope Francis' perspective of the Fratelli Tutti, the all brothers, is really a strategic key point for this, for everything. We are really brothers, and we cannot really understand ourselves without meeting each other, listening one to the other, and conversing with one with the other. And by the way, this Buddha Bodhisattva here that Francesco decided to show us gave me the opportunity to reflect about the core message of Buddhism about the fact of suffering. So the awareness of the fact that humanity is, like I say, touched by suffering. And in the Christian world, we speak about good news, means something that give us an openness, a perspective, a positiveness, or a sort of direction. The good news in the Christian world is that God loves us, all of us, and gave His life for us. But from the Buddhist perspective, the awareness of suffering is really the good news. What does it mean? It means that if I really become aware of this, only when I accept this, when I become really aware of the fact that suffering is the ground of our brotherhood, this is the good starting point for everything else. If I refuse it, and so this is something that in the Western world is somehow a challenge, a problem, and the pandemic also brought inside the challenge, the problem. In Italy, we had the image of the bodies of the track. They had to bring all of them out of the cities because of the big number 2 years ago, almost 3 years ago, and so we had somehow in our affluent society, in our culture, in which death, as Francesco mentioned, and suffering is somehow even refused, cancelled. We came back to the frailty of humanity, and this is, so you see how this, what unites. This is very, very important, and the Buddhist good news is really good news, and we can go back to that. And this is, I think, one of the lines that also could help us to improve our relationships.
Giuseppe Castiglione, looking at Giuseppe Castiglione, I always think, was Giuseppe Castiglione sacrificed 50 years in Beijing worth it? Or was it just an exotic animal serving the emperors? I think it was worth it, because in reality, he established a conversation with what in the medieval mentality would be the enemy, no? Like Muslim powers. And of course, in another conversation, if you remember, we touch upon the evocation of Francis meeting the Sultan Malik al-Kamil. So in a way, I think that Giuseppe Castiglione had very much a spirit of humbleness that was extremely strong, and even for that, I feel pity for his troubles in Beijing. But it wasn't useless. As a matter of fact, this is an interesting depiction of a poster he prepared for the Yongzheng Emperor, advising for better grains to be cultivated during a famine, and evidently it was of use to the country, as Yongzheng asked him to prepare this very depiction of possible new food. And the Yongzheng Emperor, as you know better than we do, was one of the hardest, one of the strongest opponents of the missionaries, especially because they were seen by Yongzheng as people that would not obey or were powers that could be dangerous. But also, Yongzheng had to face internal opposition from members of the Jinzhou clan who had converted to Christianity. Castiglione had a better relation with the Qianlong Emperor, when Qianlong was only a young man, and we know that then only was visiting Giuseppe Castiglione, who was older, to see the painter. So this portrait, which is in a little booklet, the cover of a booklet, which is in Taipei, is extraordinary because it is a depiction, a portrait, very much in between two worlds, the world of China, the aesthetics of China, and of Qin China, I should say, of Manchu-led China, but also of the West. And here I want to read some lines. Some lines by one of our members, and actually a Jesuit, Father Jerry Graham, who wrote a seminal work on analyzing Castiglione from the point of view of a Jesuit. So fundamentally, Castiglione felt himself located within the horizon of questioning and caring that extended outward to a transcendent order, which included the existence of God, the supernatural, the timeless origin, ending of all things, as well as the ultimate fate of all humankind. So a questioning and caring. For Castiglione live in a world in which all of these things could be cared about, so realities which did not exist as objects with the more truncated material horizon of space and time did exist for Castiglione within his much larger inner horizon of religious faith, hope, and love, religious meaning, questioning, concern, and feeling. Like Hopkins, Father Graham says, Castiglione felt that the world was charged with the grandeur of God, but that grandeur could only be discerned with the eyes of one's art, the eyes of one's faith, which is to say, the eyes of one's religious or transcendent love. So was Castiglione friendship with Qianlong similar to the friendship between Matteo Ricci and Paolo Shu Guangxi? No, because Shu Guangxi and Matteo Ricci had something a little bit more profound on a theological level. In the with Qianlong, there was something else, a working within the difference, a conversation respecting the difference and respecting the power of the other. So this I propose a scheme for let you understand and what we're trying to do. So to emulate what Father Graham wrote, I hope that the temporary agreement between the Vatican and Beijing will promote a horizon of questioning and caring, which might extend outward of exhausted schemes. There is a congruence for us, for me, with the innovative forerunners. This congruence needs inquiry, insight, conceiving, and judging. You know what I mean? Because these are basic, I want to say, methodology of pastors and missionaries to respect the suffering of men such as Monsignor Jean Luxian, among all others. Reading history to share a common lineage with China, as Bernard Lonergan, SJ would say, I anticipate to find a sense of reappropriation. It would work while being involved in a movement to a fuller self. I'm talking about myself, my fuller self. China is a futuristic opportunity Indeed, for many of us, Chinese are coming from afar to embrace a paramount humanism. I'm trying, following Giovan Battista Vico, a knowing at the making, specifically as I'm studying about matters that I do not know, that I will never possess them. Yes, matters that I could share with a Chinese person. The field of this quest is not that of religious art, as a Catholic aesthetician understand it, nor is merely that of mission history. Continuing with Vico and Lonergan, I humbly suggest an engagement with China, not prior to the knowing, rather an engagement simultaneous to the knowing, then less bound up to an immediate future of international struggles. These fights look defunctive from a higher view. I'm not sure if this is a dialogue. It is an attempt flight from our history with its stains and sadness. Moreover, those stains are noted, not ignored. We know that we did evil. We know that we are sinners. We know that others have hurt us as Christians. We know all of this. We will not ignore our faults, but we have to move out of those, at least at the disseminating level. My interpretation of the other, China or the missionaries of the past, is attending at a dialogue. For instance, here we're showing you a modest discussion within our group, the conversation of varying personalities, surely between the lay and the clergy, the Christians and the non-believers. So I think I've already exhausted the time. I wanted to talk about what my researches in this moment are, and I'm simply going to mention few names just because I'm studying them, and they're just Italians and not to the detriment of all the other missionaries, just that I'm focusing on Italian missionaries and especially Italian Jesuits. So I have mentioned Francesco Sambiasi in other conversation with you, and it's important to remember the methodology of some people of, let's say, the generation after Matteo Ricci. Ecco, some missionaries in that period believed that typological anticipation of Christian revelations could be recognized in the Confucian texts. All the more, the Jesuit way for confessing Confucian literati was not simply disciplinary, as it constituted a review of one's souls in the presence of a Jesuit guide. In that period, the marginalized scholar gentry class joined groups to bring about a moral reform of Ming society. They reaffirmed the importance of learning the classics for a revival of the whole nation. It was the best occasion to compare the Jesuit transformation of an anguished moral self with Confucian humanism, if not thwarted by sectarian and xenophobic beliefs. Humility, frugality, obedience to parents, respect for superiors and teachers of high ethical status who could act like responsible parents were community building notions for both the Chinese converts and the foreign pastors. These concepts were clear to Alfonso Vagnone, an advocate of adaptation to Chinese humanism. He promoted the formation of charitable groups as a complement to his preaching. Such groups stimulated forms of apostolate that had roots in unsocial traditions. melted well with the Jesuit lay piety and won credit for the missionaries. Vagnone, with the advice of local intellectuals, published texts in fluent Mandarin, including the education of children that Thierry Menard has studied, demonstrated how the booklet on the education of children is innovative, yet connected with the root of Confucian pedagogy and humanism to a better self. So, excluding the base of Macau, just talking about Italian Jesuits, between 1590 and 1615, about 10 Italian Jesuits were selected for missions in the reclusive Middle Kingdom by the Superior General Claudio Acquaviva d'Aragona. Before the terminal laceration of the rights controversy, the Jesuit enterprise in China was in evolution, as the Society of Jesus itself, only 50 years old. Under Acquaviva, the order tribal is in size to 550 houses and 15 provinces, numbering 13,000 fathers and coadjutor brothers. Different to an administrative post or a teaching position in Italy, the appointment to missions in Japan or China joined in the conversation of two of the most refined nations of the world. On 9 July 1602, being near the end of his philosophy studies, the 34 years old Alfonso Vagnone, son of the Count of Trofarello and Celle in Piemonte, declared that his soul needed a challenge in China or Japan. Vagnone said, now that I've almost reached port in one of my journeys, the desire for a new one increases. A journey much more useful, I hope, both for my own soul and those of others. So going back to Sambiase, who was working with Vagnone, we got to remember that Sambiase established an important connection with some of the Nanmin emperors, especially Emperor Longhu. And in the period of this map, 1645, Sambiase wrote a memorial about China. And this memorial is important for the history of Macau because Sambiase proposed to the Nanmin Onwan emperor to ease trading relation with the Lusitanian businessmen who operated at the Guangdong fairs. But in the same memorial, and I'm finishing with this 3 slides, in the same memorial, Sambiase asked permission to bury the Portuguese Jesuit João Rodrigues in Macau. A true protagonist of the Jesuit mission in Asia, he played a crucial role in the negotiation with the Ming. One should also remember that Rodrigues, hoping to see the realizing of a common catechism for the Japanese and the Chinese converts, dismissed the use of some Mandarin words to denote the name of the Lord. As Isabella Pina explains, Rodrigues intended a substitution of the words in Chinese by Portuguese or Latin words. In short, during the so-called terms controversy, Rodrigues and Niccolò Longobardo, the superior of China, were opposing another party of Jesuits. Here we see one of the members, Niccolò Trigot. This party counted also some Italians, Giulio Aleni, Alessandro Vagnone, Ro, the defensor of Macau, and Francesco Sambiase. Aleni and Vagnone favored the term Shandi, borrowed from the Confucian tradition and considered a proof of native monotheism. The visitor André Palmeiro fought especially with Vagnone, very defensive of Matteo Ricci's terminology. Father Alfonso had been imprisoned, tortured, caged, and deported to Guangzhou and Macau in 1617 and had come back in China with greater determination by 1624. He didn't want to stay silent on the precepts of Jesuit obedience. The insubordination of Vagnone was made clear during the agitated gatherings taking place in December 1627 at Jardin. The place of the debate was the Jesuit residence built with the support of Sun Yanhua. Visitors were men of control, as you know, as they represented the superior general in Roma, and Palmeiro felt responsible for disentangling errors of blind pride and ignorance, not malice, and internal competition between Jesuits. The division between the Jesuits on the adaptation to Confucian modes as a part of the conversion process illuminated an identity crisis that started with terminology. Paolo Shu Guangxi was shocked by the Jardin debate, and Sambiase was present. Negotiating at the borders of two spiritual worlds, I'd say, Aleni, Vagnoni, and Sambiase feared to waste their cultivated image in the face of their Chinese converts. To them, they presented as equals to the point of trying to fit their apostolate within Han devotional norms and expression, the controversial Chinese name for God inclusive. So on December 18, 1628, Alfonso Vagnone warned General Muzio Vitelleschi that any intention of impeding the local scholars from using the term Shanti would urge the Chinese Christians to, quote, raise dust and enemies against our holy law, as though that we wish to destroy for them the scant illumination and knowledge of God that are contained in their ancient books. In fact, Vagnone continues, educated converts already spit in our faces, saying that we want to know their books better than they themselves, who are natives and have spent their entire lives in studying them, and thus we are embarrassed on both sides. To strengthen his position with General Vitelleschi, Vagnone reported several issues that Francesco Sambiase had to face in the province of Henan at Kaifeng. Father Francesco had felt the criticism of the Christians who were not comprehensive of the debate taking place among their priests. This is Vagnone speaking, Sambiase, found himself to be very much embarrassed in this matter, and that those who were not preaching in the field were the ones who went about harassing those who were actively carrying out missionary work with their numerous examples. Afterwards, in a missive of December 1629, the visitor Palmeiro complained about Sambiase as well. Palmeiro took note of Sambiase's political engagement and thought that he was too accommodating towards the way of life of the unnotables. So I'm finishing here because we ran out of time. But we're using even the terms controversy, and please bear with us our naivete in presenting you this episode, because we see in this episode, again, I want to say most humbly, and correct us, please, if we stand wrong, we see something evoking the situation of today. And the risk is that the church will continue a debate about the temporary permanence of the agreement with China, or terminologies, and then we will lose grip with some people, millions of people, I hope, that are ready to start a conversation if maybe we get out of the terminology issues.
About this, Macau is really could really be again a sort of incredible workshop about this. And this is the scenario we think about, and this is also, Jose, our point of view about this.
No, in fact, to finish then, the Macau Special Administrative Region of the People's Republic of China is famous abroad for its blended socio-economic environment, where the leisure industry is merging with old civic buildings, Catholic churches, and important Taoist and Buddhist shrines. Before the pandemic-driven economic downturn, Macau was also becoming a high-end shopping destination for domestic or foreign tourists and investors challenging troubled Hong Kong. To diversify the local economy, Macau might embrace, again, most humbly, the twofold role of a stable financial hub and of a distinctive cultural center for competent partners. Moreover, Macau educational and cultural institutions could contribute to viable regional integration for the Greater Bay Area, interfacing respectful cosmopolitan stakeholders. Macau might be the learning city where to showcase balanced relations between China and the West, including the Holy See. Thank you.